In an attempt to appease regulators, Xbox and Microsoft have been extending 10-year distribution deals that will bring their games to platforms like Boosteroid, GeForce Now, Nintendo, and now Ubitus, which has caused a lot of conversation on whether or not Google Stadia would have benefited from the same deal. And could partnering with Xbox be the very thing to keep Google Stadia alive? That's right, folks, grab your shovels because we're digging up our old Stadia controllers. We got one more Stadia video to talk about.
Are you listening?
Hey, welcome back, friends. Today's video is going to be a very interesting topic. Would Xbox games coming to Google Stadia be enough to have kept Google Stadia alive? And I know the easy answer to this question is like, no, Google execs had it out for Stadia since day one, and I don't even think they had any interest in being in the gaming industry. But if I take a second and think, the lack of games on Stadia was probably one of my biggest complaints that I had about the platform. Towards the end of Stadia's life, new games were few and far between. And don't get me wrong, you had the new monthly additions to Stadia Pro, but in the final days of Google Stadia, players rarely saw a day-and-date release come to the platform. And there were many players, including myself, who were vocal about this. And so when you look at what Xbox is offering to these other platforms, we're gonna bring Xbox, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard PC games to your service. I mean, I would be lying to say that that wouldn't be a big deal for a platform like Stadia. Games like Fallout, Overwatch, Redfall, Deathloop, Ghostwire Tokyo, Halo Infinite, Sea of Thieves, and even Call of Duty could theoretically be on the Stadia platform thanks to a contract like this with Microsoft. And for me, as someone who looked at Call of Duty as the great white buffalo for Stadia, that game coming to the cloud gaming platform would be a huge deal. I mean, you talk about playing a game like Call of Duty without a 50 gigabyte update or just needing 100 gigabytes of storage space on your console to play it, yeah, sign me up. However, while a lineup like that would definitely bring attention to Stadia, I think it's important to remember that the severe lack in games was not the only issue plaguing Stadia. Stadia was a Linux-based gaming platform. And for Bethesda, Xbox, and Activision games to come to the service, it definitely would require some serious porting on Xbox's side. Whereas with these deals you're seeing with GeForce Now or Boosteroid, bringing PC games to those platforms is easy because those games are pretty much already available on Steam or the Epic Games Store. All they have to do is hit a check and those games are now available. And this is the part where I see people say like,
well, Xbox is porting games to Nintendo, so clearly they're willing to pay the price to port games to new platforms.
Nintendo currently has something like 120 million units sold for the Nintendo Switch. Stadia at its peak had something like 750,000 users in a month. So for Xbox to port games to Nintendo, it makes sense because the potential player base is there. But taking the time to port those games to Stadia would definitely be a reach. And again, this is where we come to hypotheticals because as desperate as Microsoft is to get this deal approved, there's a good chance we could have seen this deal happen. I do have to say though, what I find very interesting about this entire story is Google reportedly shut down their in-house development, Stadia Games and Entertainment, due to Xbox buying Bethesda. And it's funny to me now that like 3 years later, Bethesda games still could have came to the Google platform if they just would have given it time. And I guess that kind of ties us into like the big point here is that the one thing that killed Stadia was the lack of support from Google. And I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about the lack of support from the team behind Stadia. I'm talking about the lack of support from Google. Because to say that since the very beginning, Google never really wanted to be involved in this project wouldn't be an understatement. It has felt like Google has constantly stepped in its own way of succeeding. So yeah, Xbox games coming to Stadia would have been dope, but that wouldn't have changed the fact that Google didn't want to be in the Stadia business. And this is the point that I keep getting held up on this theory. Xbox couldn't have saved Stadia with this deal because Stadia was always doomed to exist, as long as they were a Google company. In fact, let's count it down together. Google rushed the launch of Stadia when the team warned the company that it wasn't ready. Google insisted that it was time to launch. Google killed its first-party studio, the team that was solely responsible on bringing exclusive titles that made the Stadia platform unique. And keep in mind here that the division of Stadia Games and Entertainment were working on bringing games like The Quarry, Tchia, High on Life, and a Hideo Kojima game to the Stadia platform as exclusives. But again, Google got in the way and killed it before the Stadia team had time to flourish. And finally, I think we all know where this story is going, Google shut down Stadia due to reorganization and budget cuts. Only for the very next day, the CEO of Google to tweet out the news that, hey, we're sponsoring a race car. Xbox games coming to Google would have been awesome, but the reality of this deal changes nothing because Google wanted Stadia dead from the very beginning, and you can't grow a platform that your company doesn't want to exist.